Our X-Files. Welcome to our X-Files vault. Regular people talking about unexplained phenomena. UFOs. Ghosts. Cryptids. Hidden archaeology. Weird science. Our stories. Our takes. Our X-Files vault.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Daily X, where I want to give you a daily report on news in the science that I find interesting, or news of the weird and the unexplained. We'll try to make this a 15-minute show every day. Today we've got some stuff on UFO encounters and some weird science news. So first is a story on the biblical city of Sodom. Which is, like anything in the Bible, is not something that most things in the Old Testament are not established as being historical places. They've never been able to find a city that was destroyed in that way. But apparently they've been closely looking at a city that was apparently destroyed by an asteroid or something similar to that 3,600 years ago. Pretty wild stuff. And scientists have been studying this, I guess, for about 15 years. The city is called, this article is, I'm taking this from the science section of Yahoo News, but the main report is in the Journal of Nature. And the city is called Tal El Hammam. And this was 3,600 years ago. This is similar to, there's been two events in modern times that were similar to this. One of them was the famous Tunguska event, which happened in 2008 in Siberia, where an asteroid or piece or comet or meteor or something similar exploded over the forest and wiped out, many, I think it was thousands or if not millions of square miles of forest. We were lucky that it hit in an area where it was probably the only area that it could hit on planet Earth and do such and not kill anybody, because if had it hit over an ocean, it would have created a tidal wave. But in this case, in the Tunguska event, happened in the most isolated part of the planet, and either killed nobody or possibly killed a few natives living in the area. But it did tremendous damage. And there was a similar event in Russia maybe 10 years ago that was caught on film, and unfortunately it exploded. It exploded high enough that it didn't kill anybody. It broke, I think, thousands of windows, and you can go on YouTube and see video from this event. So something like that struck a little bit lower and in the right place could really, really do a lot of damage. So they're saying that an event like this happened at this Tal El Hammam 3,600 years ago. The rock exploded in a massive fireball 4 kilometers above the ground. The blast was around 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima. It destroyed, I think looks like about 8,000 people lived in the town, and all of them were killed pretty much instantly. And then, so shortly after that, about a minute later, 14 miles away from this location, was the ancient city of Jericho, which you've heard of, with Joshua and his famous trumpet bringing down the walls. Jericho, I know, is arguably the oldest city in the world, or certainly was the oldest continuously occupied city in the world. It goes back thousands and thousands of years. So this blast also knocked down the famous walls of Jericho. I'm not saying that that's what inspired what came later, but maybe it did. So let's see, anything else interesting on this particular article. This was the research was done by a big team of archaeologists, geologists, geochemists, geomorphologists, mineralogists, so a lot of different people that went into this. And so this isn't just, these are mainstream scientists that are doing this report. I'm sure they have an interest in wanting to link to Sodom and to Jericho, because that helps with their research. That helps get them funding and get them publicity and stuff like that. But it's still pretty interesting. So at this, looking for it. So basically the level of heat destruction that they look at in the town could only have been created by either a volcano or by something from outer space. And there was no volcano in that area. So it could not have been created by a fire at, anything existing at that time, fire inside the town. So that had them looking to the sky, and they have found evidence they found little grains of shocked quartz that can only form under tremendous pressure, and also little tiny pieces of diamond that says are smaller than a flu virus. So I guess that's pretty small. And tiny balls of melted material smaller than airborne dust particles. These were made of vaporized iron and sand that melted at 2,900 degrees Fahrenheit. So it gives you an idea of the kind of destruction that whatever happened there did. Now, I'm a science person. I am not someone that tends to believe in ancient aliens or any of that stuff, but it does seem to me to be strangely coincidental that at a time when there were very few towns or cities on planet Earth, the Earth was incredibly sparsely populated at that point. Civilization was new and isolated to a few small areas. Most of civilization was actually in this area of the Middle East. But even then, they're still spread out in towns that are just basically, small towns that are dotting the desert. Somehow this thing happens to explode right over a town. That seems very, very unlikely to me. I'm not saying that's not the explanation. It's just very, very highly coincidental to me, to the point of being strange. And I don't propose any other explanation for it. If you were to look, you think it does call to mind the Sanskrit legends, the old Sanskrit scripts where they talk about Vimanas and some of the super weapons that these ancient Sanskrit or these ancient Indian culture, in the country of India, where they supposedly had weapons that could level cities. Again, to me, that's just their version of fiction from that day. But whenever I see something like this, it almost looks like something weaponized, something fired a weapon into this city. Now, the most like, I guess, it makes more sense to look at a meteor, but it just seems strange to me that something from outer space just happened to hit in the Middle East right at the time, at this fragile time of history, of human history, and happens to blow down the walls of the city of Jericho, which had become made famous by the Old Testament. So it's just a lot of unusual coincidences. All right, so let's move on. Let's see, in the world of science, we have this is in Psychology Today, which I cannot really stand. I generally don't have much use for this magazine or for psychology, to be honest, or at least psychological studies. New research on why women seek heroic romantic partners. Do we really need research on that? It's kind of obvious, isn't it? All right, so it says here, heroism is often conceptualized as a combination of bravery and altruism. All right, well, I mean, common sense, why female primates would evolve to have an attraction to having a protector, and those that ability of the male to protect the pregnant female, or a female that will be pregnant in the near future, is on display in the heroism and also in the bad boy stuff, in aggression. So I'm not really sure why these people even studied some of this stuff, but all right. Next, okay, this is interesting. A 3D printed vaccine patch is the next step on the COVID vaccination. So they're saying it's more effective than the actual shot. So this would be some kind of a patch that a 3D printer makes that you put on. So that's a pretty cool idea, because it's also pretty cool to think about what else can be done with that technology. So many other things, as in the near term, maybe other types of vaccinations like the flu and stuff like that. And you think about distribution where you could just now send this out to, you think about in the third world, we're having trouble getting COVID vaccines out there. You could just send a shipment of these out. People just have to stick them on. I mean, so you don't have to teach anybody how to administer the shots. You don't have to bring, we know the COVID shots have to be kept at a really, really low temperature to bar out there. You don't have to worry about that. So this to me seems like an incredible breakthrough if this proves to be something that works. But then, as we get more and more sophisticated with our knowledge of how the body works, this just could be so many other benefits to be able to use patches, to, for instance, control blood sugar or control cholesterol or fight cancer or, various other things. Excuse me while I take a drink. Okay, so let's move on. Male seahorses grow placentas to incubate their young. Well, I think all I want to say on that is let's hope that's not something that is coming to human civilization soon, but if it works, it works. Let's see. All right, this is from Mysterious Universe. All right, this is interesting. Strange encounters with bizarre metal men and robotic humanoids. And when you look at these stories, you want to look at them not just skeptically, but what you want, like, what can you learn from them? Because even if you don't believe the story, sometimes you can get something out of it, or at least explain it in a different way. And that's not to dismiss the possibility that something strange has rarely happened, but all of these explanations are worth looking into. So this was somebody who was apparently an engineer. This is in England, 1978. He's driving on a road that goes by a nuclear facility. I'm not sure how that's relevant to the story, but it seems interesting. And so all of a sudden he sees coming down or loping down the embankment is this gangly looking metallic creature. It says it was a massive humanoid figure, 7 or 8 feet in height, and that it was walking in a robotic, disjointed fashion. As it came ambling closer to his headlights, he could see that it was even more bizarre than he had thought, covered in what looked like silver skin with a black, featureless mask of some kind, glowing eyes, and 2 small arms that jutted out directly from its chest. Now, it's funny, when I see 2 small arms jutting out from its chest, I can't help thinking of the old TV show Lost in Space, where they had this big metallic robot, Danger Will Robinson. You guys, man, you have to be probably in your 50s or 60s or older to even have seen that. That show was on in the 50s, but it would have been on. I saw it in reruns when I was a kid, and then at some point it probably made no sense to. So if you're under 50, I'm assuming you haven't seen that show. But anyways, it was this really stupid looking monster. That show was on the air for years though, but so everybody was familiar with it. So it just 2 small arms that jutted out directly from its chest. That comes straight from TV. Again, not to say that this guy is making up this story. I think that if you have some kind of a hallucination, it seems likely to me that you're going to, just like your dreams or whatever, you're going to incorporate things, images from your culture and things that you see on TV or in the media. That just makes sense to me. So reading on in this same article, again, this is in Mysterious Universe, the humanoid was apparently not afraid of him or the bright headlights. Indeed, stepping over to the vehicle to loom, were right on the road in front of him and stare with those inscrutable glowing eyes. Edwards was nearly mesmerized at this point. This is the dude, not knowing whether to sit there and stare right back or get out. And then some sort of beams of light pierced force from the thing's eyes to hit him, paralyzing and disorienting him in the process. He tried to get his body to move, but could not even budge his finger. And he was now overcome with a profound sense of terror. He could only move his eyes. And upon feeling a tingling in his hands, he looked down to see that they were raw and red, as if he had had a bad sunburn. The entity transfixed him with those beams for some time before it suddenly turned away and lumbered off towards the security fence, giving Edwards back the control of his body. Edwards at this point tried to call for help, but on a transistor radio he kept in his car, but found that it was completely fried. He turned his attention back to the metallic creature and the weirdness would continue. All right, I just want to pause here to say, as soon as I see this, I say, okay, you're always looking for physical evidence to back up a story. And so if his radio was fried, that's the word that's used here, then that's evidence, but as you see from later on in this story, nobody apparently looked at that radio or anyways. So the entity stood at the security fence for several moments, studying it, and then moved forward. Edwards was sure the hulking thing was about to smash physically through the fence with brute force, but instead it stepped through it, passing right through like a ghost. And then it went up out of sight. So, eventually he ends up reporting the case, and it was investigated. And over the following days, he would develop some black marks on his hands where the burns had been, as well as nausea and headaches. In the meantime, the site would be combed by police and security forces at the facility, and they would turn up an odd oval-shaped patch of dead, flattened grass, as well as a dead rabbit, just lying there pristinely upon the ground with no discernible physical injuries. I don't know. That doesn't, does that count as physical evidence? I don't. This is in Mysterious Universe. I don't know if that was actually in a police report. So you get a website that's dedicated to making things seem mysterious. So you can never be sure of their sources. So anyways, but let's take it seriously as far as we can. And so in 1978, he went back to the location of his strange encounter with an independent UFO researcher. Well, that I can see, like if something happened to me and I wasn't, and I hadn't been a believer or someone that was into UFOs, I would be, and you can't explain it, you would become obsessed about it. And you would want answers. You'd be curious about it. And you've already got whatever you're going to get out of the official people, like say the police. They're going to go investigate it once. And if they don't find anything, that's it. You can't blame them. So it does make sense. And who are you going to get that's going to help you? Pretty much in this case, you're only going to get a UFO researcher. Certainly back then. Nowadays, you get all these paranormal research people that you can probably grab, or anybody that thinks it might be interesting on YouTube. But back then, that's all you were going to get. And so while he was out with the researcher, he suddenly became uncomfortable and gripped by a sense of panic. He managed to keep his composure and go out to investigate. And that was when he allegedly saw the same entity standing off on a nearby hill. It seemed to be staring right at him, and then it simply vanished into thin air. All right, so he goes out with the investigator, but for some reason they go their own way, and that's when he happens to see the thing. So, it suggests, if you're going to try to give the most generous spin on things here, that this is a truthful account, either he's having some kind of a delusion, some kind of a hallucination, or this thing for some reason only wants him to see it. There's some kind of a connection that's been made between him and it, and that it, whatever it is still in the area and is visible only to people that it wants, again, which makes the account very, very strange. So not long after this, in April now, so that was like a month later, he and his wife were driving through the area when he was again hit with an inexplicable sense of panic and fear. He felt this is an error here, so I'm correcting in my eyes. So he felt compelled to bring the vehicle to a stop. And as he walked outside, he was hit with a wave of terror that sent him scrambling back into the car to speed off. So again, that's just something spooking the guy, which could be his own mind. The final incident would happen when he was woken by a deep hum on April 12th, after which he searched for its source, even as it gained in intensity, but he could find nothing to account for it. He would later find that two neighbors had also heard the hum and had seen a red UFO in the sky. Well, again, that would be interesting when if you're having a hallucination and other people are sharing that hallucination, then safe to say that that's no longer a hallucination. again, you can get into the weird part of, the collective unconscious and things like that, with Jungian psychology, which does fascinate me. But still, if different people share it, it tends to be. But again, where's the evidence? He is the one that is saying neighbors told him that. So, so the same guy who's having hallucinations is told, supposedly, that's not very convincing. So the whole story would bring a whole lot of unwanted attention to him and his family. And as soon as the news hit the stands, so I guess this must have been a big deal at the time, his house was besieged with reporters and curiosity seekers to the point that it affected his life and stained his marriage. After this, he would come down with a mysterious illness that left him with stomach pains and almost bedridden. He would eventually be diagnosed with cancer, which would ultimately take his life. Well, I mean, and there's a possible explanation for the whole event. When you have metastatic cancer, which I do, so I know something about it, the metastases, little lesions, little tumors, they often go to your brain. I mean, I'm affected that by myself. I have two metastases in my brain, which are stable and don't affect my sense of reality at all, but they could. And as they start to spread, they might in the future. So, the pains and everything he was going through, this all happened within a 2-month time. So if he had metastatic cancer, which he clearly did, he probably had it for some time, many months, if not for at least a couple of years. So it had reached a point where that explains a lot of this whole incident, was he had lesions on his brain that were affecting things. So again, unless you find other physical evidence, and the only physical evidence that's in this article that's suggested is supposedly the police found an oval of, I don't know, burnt out or trampled grass or something like that. And possibly some of the neighbors had heard the hum and witnessed something in the sky, but it doesn't seem to be much evidence for that. So process that how you want. And then here's another one, which is, now these I find interesting. This is also from Mysterious Universe. And this is an article by Nick Redfern, who many people who follow mysterious phenomena have heard of. He's a British guy. He reports on a lot of this stuff, does a lot of popular books and that kind of thing. He's not one of those guys that flies off the deep end believing everything. I think he's very interested in this subject, and he's making money selling these books, but he tends to at least try to bring a little bit of a skeptical eye towards things. But yeah, there's obviously still pressure on him to find. Anyways, this article was about police officers who have witnessed these things. Now, now when you look at UFO phenomena, one of the things that's troubling about it, now I was a kid in the 70s, and I was interested in that stuff back then, like probably a lot of kids. I tended to buy, since just like say the late 70s, I was more likely to buy a UFO magazine than I was a comic book. I wasn't really into comic books, but I liked some of the stories that were in the UFO magazine. By the time I was in high school, I was no longer into it at all, and considered it a bunch of nonsense. But I still look back at it fondly, like it was entertaining nonsense. I still remember some of the stories that were posted in it. And but when, as you think of following UFOs over the years, it seems like there's very, very little, if there's no convincing physical evidence. You have really, if there's crash debris, no one really ever seems to have it. There's just rumors that it's in a government warehouse somewhere, but no one ever really turns up any crash debris ever. You have pictures, but pictures, they tend to always be kind of unfocused, and pictures are obviously very easy to manipulate. And now are things easier to manipulate now, but the equipment that you use it could be a false signal put up by the equipment that is trying to focus, and it's already using software to try to interpret that. It's doing that automatically. Your cell phone does that, as it's trying to focus on the object. So this can create images that look, very different from what you're actually filming. You could be filming a bird and it looks like something very different. So there really isn't any convincing photographic evidence. Then you have radar signals, which in some cases those are military, in some cases those are at civilian airports. But again, what do we, there's not much of that. There are some examples of it. And then again, what are you looking at? You're talking about a radar signal. That could be anything. Now, it tends to be more there are some of these instances where those radar signals are backed up by eyewitness reports from a civilian airliner. Those to me are the most impressive ones, because a civilian airliner spends his life in the sky. So these are, and you're not going to have that kind of a job unless you're a pretty stable person. And so not only you're stable, you're trained to look at what you're looking at. A lot of them had military experience, so they've been watching the sky for years. So if they see something that is really unusual and they can give you a good description of it, that's very impressive. And then if that's backed up at all by any kind of radar, those reports to me are the most interesting. But next on the list would be police accounts. Now, anecdotal reports are always a problem unless they're backed up by multiple independent, keyword being independent, sources. So in other words, the people don't know each other. And those do happen, but they seem kind of rare. It seems like 99% of the UFO counters always end up being one person, or maybe a group, occasionally a group of people, but they all could get together and say, yeah, let's do this story thing, So it's really hard to go by those. But when it does happen to a police officer, it does add more credibility, because a police officer is risking his job to put out a report like that. If they put it out, if they actually file an official report. So here's a couple of interesting stories in that here. This one was from, I think this is from 1966 in England somewhere. All right. At 4 a.m., this is in an English village or town, enough where the police apparently are walking around checking on things as part of their routine patrol at 4 a.m. That's unusual. We don't even do that in cities in the US. But so at 4 a.m., this is from his official report that he filed right after the event. About 4 a.m. on the 7th, I was checking property at the rear of a large block of shops, which are situated on the road, blah, blah, blah. At 4:10 a.m., I was still checking property and facing the back of the shops when I heard a pitched whine. For a moment, I couldn't place the noise, as it was most unfamiliar to the normal surroundings. I turned around and saw a greenish gray glow in the sky about 100 yards from me and about 35 feet up in the air. I stopped in my tracks and was unable to believe what I could see. However, I gathered myself together after a couple of seconds and made the following observations. The object was about the length of a bus, 30 feet, and estimated at being 20 feet wide. It was elliptic in shape and emanated a greenish and gray glow, which I can only describe as an eerie green color. It appeared to be motionless. That is, there is no impression of rotation. That's interesting, because by mentioning rotation, I wonder if he's thinking of a spinning disc like a flying saucer. Does he already have that in his mind? Or is he thinking of helicopter blades? Either way is reasonable. So then he goes on to, so the object was about 15 feet in height. The object had a flat bottom. At this time, it was very bright, and there was an east wind. Although it was cold, there was no frost, no cloud formation from anywhere near ground level. The object remained stationary for about 5 seconds. Then, without any change in the whine, it started moving at a very fast rate in the southeast direction. So the British Ministry of Defense did an official investigation and never found anything or resolved it. But it's interesting the details that this guy leaves in here. He definitely is a trained police observer that's trying to keep a mental grip on himself and give all the details that he could, such as, that there was no frost, which could lead to some cloud formation near ground level, or some fog or things. He's describing those conditions. So he's aware of that stuff. That's the end of that one. So this all right. So this next story is 1,000 times more interesting. However, to me, it's also unreliable, and I'll tell you why in a second. But all right, so this is supposedly from someone. I don't know if it was an MP or somebody associated with the U.S. Air Force, and the story takes place in September of 1980. In January of 1978, I was stationed at McGuire Air Force Base, New Jersey. One evening during the time frame of 0300 hours and 0500 hours, there was a number of UFO sightings in the area over the airfield, and Fort Dix's MPs were running code in the direction of Brownsville, New Jersey. A state trooper then entered gate number 5 at the rear of the base, requesting assistance and permission to enter. I was dispatched, and the trooper wanted access to the runway area, which led to the very back of the airfield and connected with a heavily wooded area that is part of the Dix training area. Sorry about all the areas, I'm just reading. He informed me that a Fort Dix MP was pursuing a low flying object, which then hovered over his car. He described it as oval-shaped with no details and glowing with a bluish green color. His radio, so I guess that's why this is connected to the previous article, because it's similar in size and look in terms of the glowing green color. His radio transmission was cut off. At that time, in front of his police car appeared a thing about 4 feet tall, grayish, brown, fat head, long arms, and a slender body. 4 feet tall, so I'm just repeating this, appeared a thing about 4 feet tall, grayish brown, fat head, long arms, and a slender body. So that's interesting. All right, so he goes on. The MP panicked and fired 5 rounds from his .45 caliber into the thing and 1 round into the object above. That's right. That's what I'm talking about. These things invade a base. You got to fire it. You got to have some fight in you. So the object then fled straight up and joined with 11 others high in the sky. So again, these little details are like odd. Like they knew there was 11, not 10 or not a bunch or not nearly. I would have just said, oh, roughly a dozen or something like that. But they actually counted 11. And now maybe that's all right. So I could imagine the British cop saying something like that, because this guy seemed to have a real police officer's training for trying to eye out every detail. But I'm not sure I'm getting that same sense from this account, especially where he's talking about a thing that was 4 feet tall. I can't picture the like, for instance, I think the English cop would have called, he might have found a better word for thing. He might have said some kind of a biological creature or something. I don't know. But anyways, so going on, he says, all right, so the object fired straight up after being shot at and leaving behind the thing. So the object joined up with the 11 others high in the sky. This we all saw, but didn't know the details at the time. What does that mean? And it's not, I don't know. I'm trying to make sense of that, except maybe they all, how do you not know the details at the time? Unless it's all right. So it's just, I'm just wondering, it doesn't say this in the article. Could that have been something brought out by hypnosis, which is a whole other can of worms? Or was it just when a bunch of the guys that witnessed this got together and then ironed out all the details? All right. So going on. Anyway, the thing ran into the woods towards our fence line, and they went to look for it. By this time, several patrols were involved. We found the body of the thing near the runway. So they found the body of this thing. It had apparently climbed the fence and died while running. It was all of a sudden hush hush, and no one was allowed near the area. So this guy's claiming that they shot and killed one. And so I guess that would be something that the military would have. So I don't know. Again, so back to why this whole thing is really the second account to me I don't consider to be a police account. So it says the following document dated September 16th, 1980, and written on official Air Force stationery was forwarded to UFO researcher Leonard Stringfield by a source to whom Stringfield gave the pseudonym of Jeffrey Morse. So, I mean, somebody got some stationery, typed up a cool story, and sent it to a UFO investigator. I'd like to do that myself. And I'd be tempted to. I'm not that I want to screw with anybody, but it's like kind of fun to screw with people. I can, it's not. I don't consider it a problem to try to stimulate people's imagination. I don't feel guilty about that. If I did not send this letter, but it gives me ideas that maybe we should do something like that. But no, you don't want to. I don't know. You don't want to screw with people, but at the same time, making the world a more imaginative place or playing a practical joke, it's not the end of the world. So yeah, unless you find something that is actually an official report that was filed with the police or with the MPs, and you can find the record and it's documented, then to me, this is just somebody messing around. So, all right. Well, so that's it for today on the Daily X. Please join me if you find any of these discussions interesting, if you want to add to them, if you'd like to be a guest on the show with me and just talk over some of these headlines. Also, I'll post a link to the discussion, the group that we have in Discord. Feel free to join us there. Always, of course, hit subscribe and spread the word. Much appreciated. So for now, good night.